Hey guys, welcome back to another Q&A. It is July 13th, 2020, and we have some pretty good questions this week. I just kind of skimmed over them real quick to make sure I had them all, and we have some good stuff. So let's see. Let's roll over to Instagram. Practical application for BCAAs versus EAAs. The only time I'd probably really use a BCAA would be maybe if someone's using like a protein source that lacks BCAAs, maybe a plant-based protein source, or we need to add more BCAAs, especially leucine, for sufficient protein synthesis. Other than that, probably really wouldn't use them a whole lot. EAAs are probably going to be a little bit more practical just because, well, it contains all the essential amino acids. So if you're using, like if you're doing an intro workout, for example, and you want to supplement with amino acids, I'm probably going to go for EAAs over BCAAs. I mean, the literature supports that, right? But that's not to say that you could never use BCAAs. Like I said, there might be that one instance there where you need to increase the branched chain amino acid content, especially leucine content of specific foods, and you could maybe use them for that. But other than that, really wouldn't use them. So let's see. Next one, any suggestions in how to heal quicker peripheral nerve damage? I did an electromyography, I think I'm saying that right, and currently have neuropathy in the cubital nerve because of extreme stretch in my arms during a game. Well, you know, nutrition wise, I mean, there's not a lot. You like essential fatty acids are important for nerves and for nerve transmissions, but B vitamins, really, I mean, you need sufficient B vitamins for nerve function, but nutritionally, other than those things and other than just like generally managing inflammation, there's not a lot you can do there. Other therapies are probably going to be more realistic, like you mentioned. Massage, anything that increases blood flow and frees up areas that might be inflamed is going to be important, because remember, try to give an easy example. Nerves. Okay, so your nerves can be in bundles, or they run through different tissues, and they touch tissues. So like sciatic nerve pain, for example, well, it's going to run through and probably touch against the pelvic girdle, and that causes pain a lot of the time. Where there's inflammation, it's pressed, or if you're like the nerve entrapment, right? So making sure that you're getting massage would probably be good. Anything that's going to increase circulation and free up tissue and let you move more freely and decrease inflammation is probably going to be good and help heal that nerve inflammation. So that's really it. Other than, like I said, a couple little things nutritionally there that I mentioned, and don't do anything that's going to impinge that nerve and further exacerbate that issue. That's the biggest thing. So next, how do you measure good digestion? I struggle with, or at least I think, low acid on cycle. Are there any good to go subs for this on top of betaine HCl? Could it be food choice selection? For example, gluten intolerance. Well, if they mean on cycle, like on anabolics, then you could look at what you are taking. A lot of the time there are bile disruptions, so you might be mistaking low low stomach acid or GERD with actually a bile disruption. So bile ducts could be gummed up, lack of bile production. So that might be part of it. Also, sometimes it seems that there can be some histamine issues with certain anabolics, and again, there's some context there, like what is it, and person to person. But if you're already using betaine HCl, of course you can titrate dose if in fact it is an actual acid issue, but probably want to look into some supplements to support bile acids. So D-limonene is a really good one. It's very cheap. It's like maybe $10 at most for a bottle, like 500 to 1,000 milligrams a few times a day. You could just do the 500 milligrams smaller capsules and have one with each meal, or do like 1,000 milligrams with bigger meals, or meals that have a little bit more fat. Lower fat in the diet might help if in fact it's a bile issue. Ginger can help with gut motility and help keep things moving through well, and potentially help the histamine issue. But again, it's probably more so a bile issue if you're just noticing. Like, for example, if you see it, if you don't really ever see it, and then all of a sudden you start taking these things and you are having this GERD or what you think might be a low acid, it's probably bile. So try the betaine. You can ramp up, start maybe 1 cap per meal. A lot of the times the caps are like 600 to 700 milligrams. You can ramp up to 2, 3, 4, 5, even 6 caps a meal if you're eating a lot of food. But if you're not noticing anything, or it's actually getting worse, meaning you probably have too much acid from taking the betaine HCl, then it's probably more so a bile issue. I mean, you didn't develop any food intolerance just because you started taking anabolic. It's not like you all of a sudden became intolerant to food. So again, get the bile ducts fixed up. TUDCA also could do that. TUDCA, D-limonene, I mean, those things would both help. All right, next, any suggestions for how to use glucometer as a non-diabetic to improve sleep, health, fat loss, progress? One suggestion might be not to bother. Well, yeah, I mean, we know that insulin resistance and chronically high blood sugar has a lot of health ramifications, at least long term. I mean, short term, how problematic is it going to be from a health standpoint? Not a lot. I mean, not really. I mean, that means you're probably not partitioning nutrients very well, and you're spilling over into most likely other tissues, aka adipose, right? But it's always, you can use a glucometer for just managing blood glucose. Now, you mentioned fat loss. If you have, and I've said this a million times, but if you have high blood glucose during a fat loss phase, then you probably have some stress or poor digestion, because really you should be more insulin sensitive during a fat loss phase, and blood glucose should probably go down unless your body has a very high, like, accumulated fatigue level. Excuse me, felt that coming. So yeah, you should really probably see lower blood glucose during a fat loss phase, or at least it should be pretty controlled. But yeah, I mean, just controlling blood glucose in general. I mean, we know that high blood glucose can lead to cardiovascular issues on top of diabetes, contribute to arterial sclerosis, contribute to metabolic syndrome in general is largely dictated by blood glucose control over time, right? So yeah, how to use the glucometer, they mentioned, or they asked. Fasted, fast. The only thing there is I'd get up, I'd probably have some fluids, try to get maybe 16 ounces of water in or so, wait 30 minutes, maybe because you might have a little bit of that adrenaline cortisol spike, and also you're dehydrated, so that is kind of a good protocol for the morning. And then you can check postprandial to see what kind of meal spikes you're having, about 2.5 hours or so, maybe 3 hours after, especially like your larger meals or carbohydrate containing meals, assuming they're not like super duper high fat, because then it's going to take longer. But those are the times to check. I mean, those are the easiest times to check. It's going to fluctuate. You don't have to check chronically. You don't have to sit and live and die by this glucometer, because it will fluctuate based on just digestion, stress, meal composition, hydration levels, sleep, all these things. So, I mean, don't expect it to be 100% on the money all the time. Just get a good average. And then anytime you get blood work, you can always check A1C levels to see kind of what your average is over a few months. Never hurts to do that. But yeah, there's a lot of benefits to controlling blood glucose, like I said, as a basically contributing heavily to metabolic disease or metabolic syndrome in general. All right, next, like I could talk about that one a lot, but yeah, that you get the idea. So central and peripheral fatigue, which is cause and which is effect? How long does each fatigue take to dissipate? All right, central fatigue being central nervous system, so brain, essentially brain, spinal cord. Now, peripheral being in the tissue, cause and effect, it's really going to depend. So one could cause the other and vice versa. Really just depends. So what is the stressor? Peripheral fatigue being in tissue, like peripheral fatigue in muscle, directly from training. So like it's an acute response. You train, your muscle gets fatigued, your muscle can't really perform because anymore, or not at it as high of a level because it's fatigued, right? Pretty simple. Central fatigue, your brain's fatigued. Could that be an acute reaction or response? Yep. Yeah, I mean, if you're stressed, right? If it's something very stressful happens, then you could have acute central fatigue. But I would say generally, well, I wouldn't even say that. Some might argue that peripheral fatigue is probably a little more acute and would lead to central fatigue eventually happening. But I wouldn't even necessarily say that, because, I run into people that are not even training. Like, these are new client inquiries, and they have a ton of central fatigue because they're just stressed, emotionally stressed, psychologically stressed. They have poor sleep, they have this and that, lack of good habits. So they have a lot of central fatigue, and they probably have peripheral fatigue because of that. So it just depends. I mean, it just depends on where the fatigue's coming from. One could cause the other and vice versa pretty easily, just depending on the situation. How long does each fatigue take to dissipate? There's literally no way that anyone could possibly answer that. It just depends. How much are we talking? Are we talking extreme burnout, adrenal insufficiency, full-blown, awful, terrible fatigue like that, like chronic fatigue syndrome type fatigue? Well, that's going to take months, year. I mean, it could take for tons of time, depending on what your recovery strategy is like. Or it could be very short. You could have acute central or acute peripheral fatigue that could just subside later in the day, right? Or you go to sleep and you're good the next morning, right? So just depends. Now, all right, we have a couple more, I think. Let's see where we at on time. Yeah, okay, we'll do these. Follow-up question related to blood glucose tracking during fat loss. I've been performing cardio fasted at what I believe is to be low intensity, heart rate 130 to 150, and age 22. I noticed that on average my blood glucose is about 85. For you folks overseas, that's 85 milligrams per deciliter. Yours is not measured like that. That would be, well, you'd be dead if that was you, but yeah. Before the fasted cardio, So it's 85 before and then about 104 after the fasted cardio. I'm wondering if this is an indication that the intensity of the cardio is too high and is resulting in muscle wasting, i.e. gluconeogenesis to fuel activity, or whether it may be mainly driven by glycogenolysis. Yeah, I can't say these words very well. Which would not be a concern with respect to muscle wasting. Yeah, right. So from a mechanistic standpoint, you're 100% correct. However, I think that you probably answered your own question in here, in that the cardio is probably just too intense. Now, is that leading to muscle wasting to any notable degree? It's hard to say. Probably not. Just because. All right. Well, here's essentially what we're looking at. To break it down real simple. So, low intensity cardio in a fasted state should not be glucose intensive, right? It should be burning mainly fatty acids because it's of lower intensity. You ramp up the intensity enough, it is going to be glucose intensive. It will use glucose as a primary fuel source. Now, if you're fasted and you don't have additional glucose in your bloodstream, what might happen? Well, you might start releasing glucose. The body may start dumping glucose in order to fuel this activity. So that's why they're seeing this 85 jump up to 104 temporarily. It's going to go back down. So is that bad or good? Well, I mean, I would say that you're probably not really at any real risk of muscle wasting there, just because your body is able to compensate by releasing this glucose to fuel the activity. So probably nothing to really worry about. However, if your goal is to burn fatty acids, like you're using certain fat loss agents like GH or yohimbine, for example, then you're probably defeating the purpose of doing this low intensity steady state cardio. And I would say that 130 to 150 is not low intensity. 150 especially is pretty moderate to high intensity. Yeah, you might see someone above that for HIIT sprints. They could get a little pretty good ways above that. Just depends on how cardio adapted the person is. But yeah, I wouldn't say 130 to 150 is low intensity at all. You figure if your resting heart rate is like 60 to, or some people even lower than 60, some people might like 50, some people even lower than that if they're really cardio adapted. But we'll say 50 to 75. All right. Low intensity might be 90 to 120 maybe. It's definitely not going to be 130 to 150. That's pretty moderate intensity at least. So depending on what your goal is with that, you might want to lower the intensity. Now, if your goal is just to burn calories, then it's not really going to make any difference. You can match the caloric burn either way. Higher intensity means you're going to achieve it quicker. Lower intensity is just going to take longer. But are you really at risk of muscle wasting there? Probably not, assuming, you're sufficiently fed and all that stuff. So the previous day. Now, yep, that should answer the question. But yeah, you are dumping glucose into the blood because the cardio is probably, glucose intensive. So it's too high of intensity for what you're looking for. All right. Let's see here. I know I had one more, maybe, somewhere. I had one more. Yes. Okay. What types of therapy do you find to be most effective for recovery purposes? Epsom salt baths, deep tissue work, cryotherapy, etc. It's a good question. I think it's whatever the person prefers and finds to be most relaxing and beneficial. Some of them don't have the science, like the die-hard science people that live and die by studies are going to say, oh, well, Epsom salt baths don't show any marked recovery in research. It's like, all right, well, they were really relaxing and you feel good after you're done. So is that not going to help? Well, yeah, obviously it's going to. It's very cheap. Just buy the Epsom salt, throw it in the bath. You can do those pretty easily. Deep tissue work, yep. Again, does it have like direct benefit? Sure. Yeah, a lot of people feel really good after they're done. They can get certain areas worked on, especially, or just an overall like soft tissue therapy where they get everything worked on. Cryotherapy, yep, I've done that many times. Does it feel great? Sure does. Does it feel like inflammation's lowered? Yep, definitely does. And I believe there's actually some research to support that as well. So see what's accessible to you. Look at your budget. Look at what makes the most sense to you in terms of, do you need an overall type of therapy? Do you have specific areas that need worked on? You might want to look like deep tissue more for that, or ART, or chiropractic, or depending on what if you got a joint issue, or some types of NMT type therapy, or people that are joint specialists that work on range of motion in the joints, or active range of motion. I mean, there's a lot of little things. Just see what you need. Or do you just want overall enhanced recovery? Then you can't go wrong with deep tissue, any of the things that you mentioned right here. So that would be my suggestion. So, all right, guys, that brings us up to the end of this week's videos, and I hope everyone enjoyed, and we'll talk to you next time.